on that same question of, biometrics and verification, because my concern about this whole aspect of the biometrics is not necessarily the process of registration in terms of identifying who voted. My problem is, even though the biometrics will tell you who voted in terms of their print and all of that, it does not say if the person who voted are legitimately Guyanese.
Oh well, you're going to another issue, and I think
right.
You're going to the issue of Venezuelans who apparently have been issued with Guyanese identification cards.
Right.
All the biometrics will say is the person who has presented this identification card is the person
who voted,
who is present at the polling station. That's all they can say. Biometrics does not address any sort of fraudulent recording of people who are not Guyanese as Guyanese and issuing them with Guyana identification cards or Guyana passports, as the case may be.
But
biometrics cannot address that.
But how do you?
Not that it can't address it. It can't, in its present format, identify it.
And is that a good thing, Mr. Hughes? Do you think that you can trust that process in terms of saying that the biometric will tell you person who voted is Guyanese? No.
I don't think anybody who has been advocating for biometrics is saying that this is a foolproof system. What they are saying is this: insofar as you want verification that the person who is on the national register has turned up to vote and is not allowed to vote on multiple occasions, then biometrics addresses that issue. So whereas before there have been allegations that people have turned up and have voted more than once, presenting different identification cards on different occasions, biometrics will say if you voted at 6 a.m. and you turn up with a different identification card in the afternoon, the fingerprint will say, I'm very sorry, you voted before. So it addresses, amongst other issues, the question of the same person voting multiple occasions. What biometrics does not address, and which is the other major area of concern, is people who have been registered and issued Guyana identification cards who clearly not entitled to them, who will then present these cards to the polling station. And of course, the fact that they've been issued and registered means their prints will be in the system. So biometrics will just confirm that Pedro Venezuela is Pedro Venezuela. It will never tell you whether Pedro Venezuela is a Guyanese and was entitled to be registered and issued a Guyana identification card as a Guyanese. And I think, Andrew, you touched on the issue there, and there's a huge problem and difficulty with the process, and that's this. The law got amended to allow the two shows and community leaders to verify that if Andrew Weeks turned up at Baramita and Andrew Weeks said, I was born in Baramita, but my birth was never recorded, then the two show is then given the power to say, yes, I know this is Andrew Weeks. I remember he grew up in the village. And Andrew Weeks thereafter becomes entitled first to a Guyana birth certificate because the Tushao has now verified that Andrew Weeks was born or grew up in Baramita. And he gets that birth certificate, then becomes entitled to Guyana identification card. He can then register, prints are taken, and he can vote. Now, the problem with that is that if the Tushao is less than honest, or if the Tushao is less accurate in making representations or approving the persons who he said grew up in the area, then the system is open to complete abuse. And there's no system of verifying whether or not what the Tushao says is accurate. So if you have a Tushao who is less than faithful to his oath, and he says, 200 people, yes, grew up in this village, those 200 people merely on his say-so become entitled to a Guyana birth certificate, and then they become entitled to a Guyana identification card, and they then make their way to the list of electors and entitled to vote. Now, one of the problems we have, and we have several in Guyana in relation to this issue, is we have no official figures and no official information on the number of Venezuelans who are in Guyana to start with. So we don't know if it's 30,000, 60,000, 2,000, 3,000. So that's the first figure you would need. Then secondly, how many of them have applied for and potentially been granted Guyana identification cards? Because some of the Venezuelans who have come to Guyana are Guyanese who had left to go and live in various parts of Venezuela. So we certainly need information on what those numbers are, so we could begin to see what is going on in terms of the electoral register. Thirdly, there's absolutely no information on the census. It's already 2 years, heading to 3 years overdue. Now, all this information the public is entitled to this information. This is not private, confidential government information. All of us, each and every one of us is entitled to this information. And so when you have such a large body of data that is being either not disclosed or intentionally suppressed, then it leads to a lot of difficulties. And of course, after that, as if the information is not available, people start to speculate. And of course, in the process of speculation, it impacts the integrity and standing of the electoral process, which leads to problems afterwards. And these are very, very simple issues that can be resolved. Declare how many people do we officially know of Venezuelan origin are in Guyana? Bottom line, 20,000, 30,000, 90,000? We start with that figure. Secondly, how many of those people are Guyanese? How many of them hold Guyanese identification cards?